Hi, everybody. I'm David Amadon. I chair the business media group at Burns & Levinson in Boston. Thanks for taking the time to join us today for what I believe will be a really interesting discussion on the pivot to virtual meetings and events, what we're calling success and other stories from the front lines. This is one of a continuing series of webinars that the business media group is planning to address topics and issues of interest and current and future challenges facing our industry. Please be on the lookout for invitations to future webinars. Joining me today are two meetings and event industry professionals and friends. Alicia Ivanka Lewis. Alicia is a 20-year veteran travel and hospitality industry events leader. Since 2011, she served as the Executive Vice President for Global Events at North Star Travel Group, one of the largest and most trusted travel, media, information, and services companies in the world. Alicia oversees leading events in hospitality, travel technology, and leisure and retail travel spaces, while managing a global team of sales, marketing, operations, and event management staff. Bruce Goldwhite's currently the president and COO of Palisades Convention Management. Bruce has over 37 years experience in sales, event, and media management and leadership positions, helping clients analyze and capitalize on business opportunities, identify key issues and synergies, and establish solutions for sustained growth to meet or exceed business objectives through his hands-on leadership style and focused implementation. A little bit about me. I chair the business media group at Burns & Levinson, which provides life cycle legal advisory services to the innovative companies that are currently transforming B2B and B2C engagement and communications. As a trusted advisor to our business media clients, we help them meet their business objective of connecting buyers and sellers in ever more diverse and creative ways. Over my now almost 40-year career, I've held both inside executive and outside advisory roles. This unique perspective helps us to better help our clients identify and address the issues and challenges faced in a competitive and evolving market. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, we have disabled the chat feature for our discussion today, but we are taking questions during the webinar. Please use the Q&A feature, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. We've set aside some time at the end to answer as many of the questions today as we can. We will try to answer them by topic, so if we don't mention your specific question, please rest assured that we'll try to get it answered. If we can't get to everyone's questions before our hour is up, we will reply to you after the webinar. Also, today's webinar is being recorded. This will enable the viewers to go back to the recording and view it from our website or on YouTube. We will also be sending a link out to those who are attending, as well as others who registered but might not have made it today for the live viewing. Okay, so let's jump in. First question I have for our panelists is, how did you approach the need to pivot your face-to-face events to remote or virtual events, obviously due to the pandemic and all of the shutdowns and restrictions that started earlier this year? And Bruce, let's start with you on this one.
Well, thank you, David. Well, with our events, we don't own them. We're a show management company for associations and nonprofits. So we've had 3 in this case. And the way we did that is, we had to break it in half, 2 parts. The first is, at the same time, doing it in parallel, we had to look at all the opportunities out there, meaning all the platforms, and start investigating them that we didn't have hands-on knowledge of them. So as we did that, at the same time, for especially one client in particular, we had to then look at the contracts in place because there were hotels and venue, as well as operational, let it be service, general service contractors, AV, and all of those, and look how to get out of those and have those negotiations go on at the same time. But regarding the platforms, how we looked at that is we basically, it was a group, about 6 of us, started looking at the different platforms, requesting demos. All of us in that group started having the conversations with the companies, and then looking at the demos, looking which best fits each of our clients and their needs. Some was one platform that could take care of it. Others, we needed to do 2 platforms to integrate the components of their events. And then we started getting into the weeds, as you say, and seeing how it would integrate with the registration platform that we used, and then we started negotiating with them and rolling it out, because when this happened, we were 3 months, basically 90 days out from the live event, which we had to turn on its head and start then communicating with exhibitors, as well as the operational vendors we did, and then at the same time rolling out the virtual platform.
One of the questions that I've gotten a lot from event organizers and event managers as they look at the necessity to take face-to-face to a more virtual format is whether and to what extent there exist consultants in the space to help them with this transition. The process you outlined, Bruce, is complicated, to say the least, and involves a lot of moving parts and a lot of steps. Did you become aware of any consultants in the space, or did Palisades kind of build teams and just sort of go it alone?
Well, for the one client, there was a consultant who was able to oversee it. Would we suggest moving in that direction again? The answer is no. We felt we had to supply most of the manpower and knowledge. Yes, with that short turnaround for one client, we could never have done it without their intricate knowledge and participation in helping us. So to us in that, and the other clients that we're doing in this third, fourth quarter, in a virtual event, we're doing it on our own from the knowledge that we gained. And it's a lot smoother that way. There's a lot of these platform companies, we found they had from March through, I'd say, August, they had such growth that they didn't have the staff. They went to third-party vendors to assist them. That became somewhat difficult, that third-party vendors didn't know all the ins and outs of what the platform could assist them with or what the contract had. So, I would say if we had to do that again, we wouldn't use a consultant in that field, for our experience.
Alicia, I know that at North Star, you guys did not use consultants in your planning to move your face-to-face events to virtual. So what was your focus as you guys realized you had to, as Bruce says, turn these events on their head?
It's crazy. I mean, like everyone that is in this business that's doing what we're doing, there was no path. I mean, there was no strategy. It's just, you got thrown into the fire and you just had to figure out how to put it out, right? And as Bruce was talking, it made me think this whole experience has brought me back to the early days of my career, starting out as an assistant, a coordinator, a manager, a director. And, that's the way you learn. You learn when you're in it, and you think back to how you've evolved personally and how you've grown. Let's talk about in the event and the conference business. All of us have, once you get to a point of running a group or running a company, you've done something, you've built a system, you've run registration, you've run operations, you've been a salesperson, you've been a marketer. And it really brings me back to those days because you kind of had to figure everything out. Now in a world before COVID, you had a plan, right? So as someone who's running a group or running an organization, you kind of know, you feel, of course you have your dips and you have, things that change, but you kind of know what that plan is. And you've got this person that has this area expertise, this person that has it, and then all of a sudden it all just blew up come March. So we had our first, we had a large event that was scheduled to take place the first week of April, and we had to make the decision. And really, COVID was mid-March is when things, right? Mid-March is when things started to shut down. I live in New York City and was in Manhattan at the time. And that's kind of when everything just started to get really bad. And I just remember sitting there every day, still going into the office at that point, and like, should we shut down this event? And now we're not shutting it down. Some in the travel industry, and all of my events are in travel and hospitality. And that's it. We're going to support the travel industry. We're going. COVID, no COVID. I'm getting on the plane and going to Tahoe. Well, that didn't happen. So we were forced, the state of California shut down the event. You just didn't have time to think, you didn't. So you had to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? We're a for-profit organization. We have sponsors, we have partners. This is how we make money. And what do you do? How do you try and secure that revenue? How do you try and create a virtual experience? And you basically have, a day to do it. And it was, I'm telling you, I said this today, I was just writing an email before this call, and I know I'm a bit all over the place, but I think it's important to recognize as you're going through this, it's an incredible learning experience, and you got to get in it, because if you are not in it, you don't know. Bruce, when you were talking about the the virtual platforms out there, and we did a million demos, and you kind of really don't know what you need because you don't know what you don't know. So you get into systems, and that networking is important. You need appointments, you need a platform that's going to showcase a conference, and you're going to be able to, that's going to work successfully. But until you get in it, and I have found myself over the past couple of months, really being in it and trying to understand how these platforms work, because you can't talk the talk unless you know. So, in hindsight, when I look back and think about all the time and effort, I'm split on this. We spent a ton of time going through and demoing a lot of platforms, probably 30 platforms. And we did have our IT team spearheaded putting these demos together. And, we had this really great spreadsheet that told you, what the bells and whistles of each platform was. But we spent so much time on it that we just had our first virtual event last week, actually, and we have 3 going on this week. And we just got the keys to the car the 2 weeks before the event, right? So here you are, you have to execute. And Bruce, you said this in one of our prep calls. You basically are putting 6 months of work into, and you got 4 weeks in some, 4 to 6 weeks to get it done. In this case, we had 2 weeks. And, and everybody says, I'm sure everyone who's listening here has said this themselves or heard it from their colleagues or team members. We don't have the skill set. This is not what we do. We plan meetings, we plan conferences, this technology stuff, you kind of just have to learn. And David, I don't even think there was time to find a consultant. And quite frankly, even if you found a consultant, I'm not sure how that would work, because the operating teams have to be so in it to understand it and to be able to explain the pieces to their sponsors and their partners and their attendees. So I don't remember what the original question is, but what I do know is I wish I had more time to plan, because as we had those 2 weeks to get our first virtual event off the ground, we didn't know what we didn't know. So you learn as you're going. And now we're in the process of getting a bunch of other conferences on the same platform. And I don't think there's any magic answer. I think you get it, you make the decision, and I don't think we made the wrong decision. We love our platform that we're using. We're using a platform called Swap Card. I've got an event in November that I'm not quite sure it will work for because I may need something that's more geared towards booths and trade shows. We're kind of working through that now, but it's just get in it and understand it so you know it's going to work.
See, and that's one of the things when we were talking in the prep, yours aren't exhibits like all of mine are.
Mhm.
We have technical sponsors, exhibits, and the technical is very important. So that's why we had a consultant to help us integrate it for that, because we had a short turnaround. But with the exhibits, the technical part was a success in any way you want to look at it. All the attendees liked it because they were able to play it back, and keep on going back and forth and learn better. The exhibit part is not the same experience as people walking in and shaking hands and talking, because there's no 3D one out there that someone could really have a booth like you would see on a show floor and turn it around and take them through it and then have a Zoom call to talk about it. That would be ideal. But all of these now are just PDFs, some Zoom calls, some videos, and that's not the same thing as the experience of a face-to-face. And that's something that we're all looking at. How do we do that? And then the other part is, if you're having live events and you have an international crowd with many different time zones, okay, so you do it on the West Coast time zone, but you're going to leave Europe out of it in a unique time difference. And so that's the other thing, where when you have a face-to-face, everyone plans, okay, I'm going to be out of the office X amount of time. I'm going to book my hotel, my air flight, and come there. And you have their 90% attention versus right now with it video being streaming. Okay, I'll get to it later. Let me look at this. I got this job and I have this to do at this time. So you're not getting the same experience from attendee or an exhibitor standpoint at the same point. And that to me is a far cry. Will we be going in all of our events, or probably 80% of our clients' events, to a hybrid event going forward? The answer is yes. Digital is here, but the exhibiting part is not the experience nor the sponsorship one right now. Will some of these platforms come out with 3D and some other things? Hopefully, but it's going to take time, and that's the pushback.
I think that's the technology opportunity that exists in the marketplace for some of the vendors who are solution providers in this area, is to work with you guys and your counterparts in the industry to better recreate that in-person or face-to-face experience, where it works for events. For meetings and conferences, it may be less of an issue, but certainly for expos, for trade shows, that's something where the digital experience doesn't quite match up with the face-to-face. One takeaway I got from that discussion just now is that as you move from face-to-face to virtual and you climb the learning curve, Alicia, as you suggest, part of it is striking the right balance within your organization between analysis and the need to move forward. You can't spend all your time trying to answer every question and ultimately letting perfect become the enemy of good. So I think that's one takeaway that our audience can have today. Yeah, one of the operational challenges that people did face and are facing in the pivot to virtual events from face-to-face is exiting their existing face-to-face specific contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, housing contracts, venue licenses, and that sort of thing. Bruce, can you share with us a little bit how Palisades approached this on behalf of its clients making this transition?
Sure. On each of those, I personally handled that, but this past session or segment of the pandemic was somewhat easier because it was worldwide and it impacted everyone to the point where a lot of hotels were basically furloughing everyone. But still, the conversations with the tier one convention centers to even the hotels, the first was the convention center in each of those places. I had the conversation, and it usually took 3 or 4 conversations in depth. And then once we came to an agreement, then going to the hotels individually to explain the situation. And some were understanding and very easy to deal with. Others push back, and it just becomes a lot of tenacity and not giving up. But you have to, share with them. Are you coming back? Are we looking at the short-term gain versus long-term opportunities if you're going to come back to that market? And yes, each of those people answer to private ownerships because they're franchised for a lot of the hotels. In one instance, for one client, it got to their legal department, and then finally, it was more of a government DOD event, and I had to get letters from the Secretary of Defense and the different divisions, and then I worked it out that 4 years later I'm going to come back, and was able to be settled and get all the attendees and exhibitors' monies back. But it's difficult. It's time consuming. Not everyone is understanding as others because they have their own bottom lines to deal with. But it's a delicate balance. And truthfully, hopefully the industry, when it does come back, hopefully third or fourth quarter in 21 and 22 to a face-to-face, the hoteliers will be realistic about their pricing structure versus not going back to pre-COVID, what the pricing was. What's going to happen with the convention centers and the hotels if you have a conference in a hotel venue with spacing. Are you going to have everyone 6 feet away? How is that impacting your food and beverage? How is that going to impact in a convention center with exhibits? So all these things, are you going to have to rent more space? Is there going to be space enough in the venue that you have with a contract? And are they going to start charging you more? So it impacts a whole cycle of things. These are the kind of conversations a lot of the venues and hotels don't have answers for, because the counties and states have not really been presented with these obstacles and how to roll it out either.
Yeah, Alicia, we talked in the prep and before about this question, and I know in your experience, I think you've probably found the venues and the hotels generally to be cooperative under the circumstances, but it comes at a little bit of a cost, I guess I'll say, in terms of what the contracts might look like going forward. Can you touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, look, I'll say this. Our vendors and our hotels, they're our partners, and you got to give a little to get a little. That's how negotiating works across the board, when you end up in this situation. And I will say, David, to echo what you said, we had no issues. So to date, no issues. Our hotel partners and any vendor contracts that we could not execute on, they were all very flexible in moving them to next year. But there certainly were cases where, as I said, we had to give a little. So whether that was signing out for another 2 years, whether that was, everybody, and to Bruce's point, nobody knows, you're doing the best you can to kind of, you've got your task list in front of you, and you're kind of going through this when you are canceling a live event and trying to move it to virtual. There's so many moving pieces. There's, the contracts and all of that has to happen. So, and you're moving at a rapid pace. It does not, so do not feel bad. It does not leave much time. There's many times I go to bed at night, I'm like, oh my God, how do we it was something that would have taken weeks to get done, or should have taken weeks of thinking and strategy. It doesn't exist anymore. It just doesn't. Sometimes you have 2 hours, and I've had plenty of conversations working with David through this process. How do we handle what's, force majeure clauses? Hotels are all revising their force majeure clauses. They're all a little bit different. Some didn't have them ready. Some did. So it was just, in some cases, in order to move things along and kind of get to the next step and make sure it works out for both parties, you just had to, like I said, give another 2 years, give another year of the contract. Maybe the force majeure clause that you're using now, a hotel wouldn't. We had some hotels that just would not adapt to it. They just wouldn't. They wouldn't budge. So we worked with David on that, and we came to a happy medium. However, what I will say is I don't think these venues and hotels and vendors are going to be as flexible next year. I had a situation where some contracts I didn't have a choice. I had to cancel because the state shut me down or the venue was not open. But I had an event that's scheduled to take place in the near future, and we decided the hotel could have held us. They could have done the event, but what I'm seeing across all of our events is, you talk to your attendees, and there are a lot of people that are, look, this thing is very personal. So some people are like, I want to get out there, I want to travel, but some people are, no way, I'm not traveling until there's a vaccine, or I just don't feel safe, or people have health issues. So, I would recommend polling your attendees if you do have a live event or a hybrid event, that's some form of live event that's coming up. And we found ourselves in a situation where we had this particular group who were just so excited. They couldn't wait. We were having bi-weekly calls with the hotel, and everything was very positive. We would it's very important, stay in communication with your partners and let them know what's going on. Put them on your email list. If you're running other virtual events, let them attend. The more information and the more communication and the more open you can be, I believe you'll get a better outcome with your partners. But this one, we got down to the 5-week mark, and we just started to see more people say, well, I don't know, I'm excited, but I don't know if I'm going to go. And then school started shutting down. So people that had children said, I can't travel in September. So, we made the decision based on that information that we had 5 weeks out to cancel and move it to 100% virtual. Well, the hotel was not happy at all.
Yeah.
We worked through it and we got to a good place, but in this particular instance, they could have held us to the force majeure because there was no reason we couldn't have held the event, but they did not. They were a very good partner, and in exchange, we signed 2 years with them.
Yeah, that's an aspect of this whole pivot that I've spent a lot of time addressing with clients, including both of you. Which, generally the changes in event contracts that are necessitated when the format moves from face-to-face to virtual. And, some of the key areas we've touched on today and that we've addressed in this process include how do booth sponsor and attendee terms and conditions for a face-to-face event translate into a virtual format? Do they need to be changed? Indemnity and liability releases are being extended, and there needs to be a matching of these things. Force majeure is another example. As an event organizer, you have certain constraints that are dictated by your venue. Typically, you want comparable, if not mirroring, provisions in your customer-facing contracts as well. So I think a lot of this exercise. And Alicia, you refer to it as no time to think. You just need to act. I've heard it referred to as drinking out of a fire hose. But one of the things that you need to do in that context is, as an event organizer, is really find some time to look at your legacy forms and templates and make sure that they work in this new paradigm. Bruce, what are you seeing with your clients in terms of their level of attention and how much of a priority is this, updating of contracts and reviewing of, contract terms, both, venue and housing facing and customer facing?
For the most part, they're leaving it to us as the show management company to do. A lot of the clients that we have are volunteer boards, so they are not full-time staff. The ones that are full-time staff, they're in it with us and understand the need to do that. But majority are leaving it to us, and we are going through that. Now, some venues are open to some creative ideas. Others are making it a lot tougher. When I say creative ideas, if you have an event that is international based, and if you have a certain percentage of attendees and exhibitors who couldn't come, A, because of the pandemic, B, because the borders aren't open, you're able to get out of it very easily. But in other cases, depending on the ownership of the property and how they're looking at it, it is much more difficult to have those conversations.
Alicia, I know you and I have worked a lot on that kind of stuff together over the past several months. So I have a good sense of what North Star's approach to all of this has been. But I'd like to shift a little bit away from that and ask what you guys are finding specifically regarding your insurance programs. I know a lot of insurance companies have been making noises about, and many have instituted broader and more onerous exclusions for contagious disease from their coverage for showstoppers, for general show liability, and that sort of thing. In this new reality of the insurance companies basically, lateraling the ball back to their customers to bear that risk, what do you see as a show organizer's options in that regard? What are the opportunities and what are the risks that presents for you guys as a show organizer of your own events?
Yeah, well, that's been, insurance policies are going to change as a result of this. We've had several conversations with our insurance broker, and it's tough because, insurance policies aren't cheap. Everybody knows what you pay depending on the size of your event. So the discussions I've been having are, how do you commit? Normally we're in the fall, you're in that time of year when you start committing to your policies for the following year, right? So conversations that I've had with our broker are, how do we do that when we don't, because once you commit to your policy, you don't get your money back, right? So you've suddenly paid all this money for an insurance policy, and if your event goes virtual, you don't get that money back. That is the sunken cost that you've paid for. Communicable disease is no longer an option. So none of us are going to be protected if there is, something like a COVID outbreak. But we are actually taking it. We're not going to commit to all of our policies right now at this time frame. We're going to continue to communicate with our broker. We're going to see, because there's at least in what I'm dealing with, there's a whole, forms that have to be filled out. What's the revenue on the event? What are the expense? And that determines the cost of the policy. And with so many unknowns, none of us know. I wish we were fortune tellers, but we don't know what we're going to look like. So we're taking it on a monthly basis, staying in touch with our broker. And as we continue to plan, especially for 2021, and we get through our virtual events that are happening and planning for live, we're taking it month by month, but we haven't committed to our policies just yet for 2021. Now that of course is going to vary based on the size of your organization and how you approach insurance.
Yep. Yeah, Bruce, I know you spend a lot of time, most of your time, running events for associations, many of which are nonprofits, most of which don't have in-house event organizing and management staff. Slightly different model from an insurance and risk management plan. What's different about what you're doing in your space, particularly as it relates to associations? How are they approaching this, particularly the nonprofits?
Basically, like Alicia said, the ones that are up to probably June of 21, We are not, we're having the conversation with our broker, which is probably the largest one and probably a lot in the industry use already, keeping them attuned of or abreast of what our clients are thinking, trying to get some ideas of where it will settle on pricing or what will be included. But we haven't pulled the trigger on saying let's buy the insurances yet, because the revenue stream for face-to-face is completely different than a virtual, and you don't need the insurance for the virtual. So there's a lot of hesitancy from our clients as well.
I will say one other point to add in case, because this is something I learned going through this process. We moved the dates of several events, thinking they would be live. And you have to get a new policy. So even though it's the same event at the same hotel, I had something that was scheduled to take place in July and got moved to October. And I had to get another, and it ended up moving virtual, but I would have had to pay for another policy. It's not that when you move those dates, it's not that money, at least the policy that I have transferred from July to October, they had to quote it again and give me another cost. And the premium actually went up because I moved into hurricane season in Florida from whatever the date was. And I was like, what? I mean, I must have asked the broker 100 different ways. I wanted an answer that he wasn't giving me, but I was like,
Yeah,
it's possible. You told me I got to pay it again. So we ended up moving virtual. We didn't have to pay for a second policy, but I may have had to, because not forget COVID, but the issue could have been hurricane season if something happened. And did I want to take that risk? It's funny how you think about risk now, David, when you're talking about it. I mean, pre-COVID, right. I'm sure everyone can relate to this. You're like, that'll never happen. You kind of pick your battles and you think of things of the extreme. And now you can't think like that anymore. And when I'm sitting here, one example is this insurance policy. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to pay another, 15, 20 grand for this policy when the odds of a hurricane actually blowing down the hotel are probably not. But then I'm like, who knows? Anything's possible now.
Well, and I guess it gets to a point where it becomes a true, cost benefit question, right? So the insurance companies, I'm not intending this to be, entirely derogatory and pejorative, but the insurance companies continue to narrow what's covered. Covered events become a smaller and smaller subset of what could happen. And I think almost by definition, that means it's more likely that something that's not covered is actually going to happen. And I think that's one of the takeaways that event organizers and their risk management teams need to look at in terms of how they organize and run their events, how they document their events. And insurance is a piece of it, but I don't think insurance is one of the things, like it's been historically. Well, we have insurance, so I'm not going to worry about that, because now you might not have insurance if something happens, or you might not have as much insurance if something happens. And what I see happening is we get to a tipping point where self-insurance for certain of these risks is going to become the norm, because to insure through an underwriter is going to become too expensive. It's going to make the events, when you add the cost, that G&A component into the cost of the events against contribution, it becomes, the profit margins don't exist anymore. So what that, to me, one of the things that indicates, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but just as a preview, kind of where we're going long-term and how do virtual events fit in to the landscape in the long term, given this new risk profile and risk paradigm going forward. But before we get to that, now that we have this great new virtual model that through fast track planning and by luck and good fortune we've put together, the real question is, how are your customers responding to this model? Are you getting pushback from sponsors, exhibitors, attendees, delegates? Is there good adoption? Is it all over the board? Does it kind of depend on certain things? Alicia, how did you get a lot of pushback from your face-to-face customers when you moved some of your events to virtual?
Sure. It's a ton of work. It is, because think about it. We've all had terms and conditions for those of us who are selling exhibits and sponsorships, and nowhere in those terms and conditions doesn't mention you have to move virtual. So the reality is it doesn't protect you at all within the terms and conditions. And this is where David, we didn't get to really go into your own contract terms and conditions, but this is where David is incredibly valuable and helped me rewrite the terms. So we did have a clause that addressed if we move from live to virtual. But I will say, at the end of the day, kind of have to do the right thing, right? And you got to be going back to being a partner, and it doesn't always work. And you could have these terms and conditions, but you have a long-standing relationship with a customer, an exhibitor, a sponsor, and so a lot of these terms and conditions have to be renegotiated. And in the end, you want to do the right thing that benefits both parties. But I will say that it was hard work. It's not easy. It's not as if you just make the announcement that we're moving virtual and then everyone just signs in the dotted line and you move on your way. It's hard work. And it takes, you're in these short windows, these short time frames. And if you have 5 weeks and you've decided at the 5-week period, you're going from live to virtual, it's not a lot of time, because you got to get everybody, and in my experience, it was many, many phone calls, not just emails. And people, I think the reality is many exhibitors, sponsors don't see the same value in virtual as they do in live. They don't, and that all of us, I'm sure, have gotten the same pushback. Well, what's the discount? Is it going to be the same? And the one thing that I will say is, yes, it's different. This is never going to replace what happens at a live event, right? It's never going to replace the ability to bump into somebody at a coffee break or see someone at a bar. And let's face it, I truly believe this is never going to change. Face-to-face is what builds relationships, and we'll get back there. It might look a little bit different, but over the years, that's what builds relationships. So it's tough. And my point was, don't undervalue your audience. And I've had this conversation with many of our partners. We're still delivering an audience at the end of the day. And in many cases,
right,
You're delivering a larger audience. So it's hard. It just requires time. So if you're planning on moving from live to virtual and it's within and you can control it, give yourself as much time, because there's going to be a lot of conversations that you're going to have with your partners.
Yeah, Bruce,
go ahead.
We work closely on a transition for a very significant event. And I was wondering if you could share some of your thoughts on kind of what's evolving in your mind as good or best practices in terms of a marketing and communication strategy, if you will, to sell this to your constituent, to sell this transition to virtual to the constituents. Because I know your team was very, very involved in crafting what ultimately turned out to be a successful program.
Yes, and I appreciate that, but it was very difficult because the client in that really didn't look at the community as a whole. They looked at what it was going to cost them, and there wasn't as much transparency as I would have liked for this one client, where we had with others, with the exhibitors or the attendees, mostly the exhibitors, and tell them what was going on. They forced situations where some clients, exhibitors, and sponsors will never participate again because the hand was forced, and they were very upset about it. So to me, the most important thing is communication, transparency. At the end of the day, a good many of the exhibitors, sponsors said, you guys worked extremely hard turning this around, and you made the best of a bad situation. Now, if you're taking that and going forward to the next year, they're are some strong feelings both ways that you need to have communication, open dialogue, understanding if an exhibitor has $60,000 in there, are they getting it back? Or are you going to keep unrolling it? Or are you going to hold money back? There are all these things that it may seem insignificant in the big picture, but exhibitors remember that, and it's part of their community. So to me, you need your sales team, as well as everyone involved in the event, has to have all the ammunition and information, because in this one instance, it was changing on a daily basis because of how bad COVID was getting. Originally, we thought we could move it to an August date face-to-face. We were able to get out of it. And in this one client, they had the sunken costs were from other things. It wasn't from hotels or venues. We were able to get out of those 100% clean. So there was issues that need to be addressed. So I guess my thought on this is to always be clear and concise, and keep your community, let it be exhibitors in this who are driving the revenue, as well as the attendees, abreast of what your thoughts are, and try to lay it out now that we've gone through it once. Other clients, they, some wanted to not roll over the money, let it be an exhibitor attendee. They got the money back. They didn't have a problem with it. So you need to be very careful. It's a fine line. And as you said, this is a lot of money for this one client, and it runs their association for the year, and some, but you need to be careful in how you do that.
Yeah. I think that's a great piece of advice for our listeners today. Is the communication needs to be effective communication, and that means it needs to be current information. You have to anticipate what your community wants to hear and give it to them before they come asking for it, because that's going to create some sense and some confidence that you're actually putting their interests and their concerns first rather than yours. The other piece that you mentioned, I just want to underscore it for our listeners today, is the necessity for making sure everybody on the internal team, on the show organizing team, is current and understands and speaks with one voice in terms of the messaging, if they have any contact whatsoever with your external community. The worst thing that can happen is for the leadership team to come up with a plan, not have it effectively communicated to boots on the ground, and all of a sudden there's mixed messages out there. That just creates problems where they didn't need to exist.
Yeah, and David, I'll piggyback off of what you and Bruce are saying, and having gone through this now a couple times, lay it all out and dissect your packages too, right? So when you go out, and if you have a big show or a big conference, chances are you've got different packages that your clients have bought. So you have to tell them what they're going to get for that virtual package. And in some cases, going back, we've had to move so many, we didn't have all that information because we didn't have our platform built, but now I'm getting ready to potentially, based on some variables, go move another live event virtual. And I personally actually have spent hours kind of taking the list, dissecting it into categories, and figuring out kind of what I need to include, because it's not as easy. That's the first question. Well, what does it look like? What am I going to get? What are my bullet points? And what does the system look like? And I find that the best way, it's because people don't know. It's a whole new world we're navigating, is to make sure you have either you're walking the client through the system so they see what it is, and you're doing scheduling those calls to do that, or you have the proper marketing materials that have visuals. Because visuals and being able to walk them through provide certainty in a very uncertain world. So as I move forward, and if I have to move events in the future, I'll make sure that I've got all of that done and ready to go, because it'll save hours of conversations. Make sure your website's updated, make sure your attendees know exactly what they're getting. You got to think pricing strategy. If you're talking for registration price points, is it the same price? Are you going to value add if you're in a situation that you have other products? Do you then say, if you keep your money in the virtual event, I'm going to give you X, Y, Z? I mean, these are things that require hours and hours of conversations, but the more buttoned up you are, the better received your customers and the market will be when you pivot to virtual.
Totally agree. Totally agree with that. I want to be respectful of Bruce and Alicia of your time, obviously today, but also our listeners. We have about 10 minutes left. And I had one more question I wanted to throw out to each of you, and maybe I'll use it as an opportunity for each of you to spend a minute or so, please, because we do have some questions I want to get to from our listeners. And maybe you can use this as a kind of a wrap up of your experiences, synthesize it, put it in the blender, and then take a look down the road. There's a lot of speculation in the market today about the role that virtual events will play in the longer term in our space. So Bruce, I'll start with you, and Alicia, same question. And when Bruce finishes, do you see the market getting back to a day where face-to-face is a realistic option for organizers?
Yes, I think it, as I said earlier, it may be depending on the vaccine and what happens maybe in November and certain other political issues, that it happens third or probably fourth quarter, maybe first quarter of 22, but yes, it will. It will also be, I think, going forward, a hybrid, more for the technical sessions than for the exhibitor component to, as I elaborated earlier, we get to a more sophisticated 3D one. But it's here to stay in some format, a digital virtual one, but not face-to-face, will not take away the face-to-face. We'll get back to that.
Alicia, how about for the more conference-focused and meetings-focused side of the industry? How do you see virtual and face-to-face working together?
On we've gone through now a couple virtual events and have spoken to customers and gotten their feedback. I think this is going to enhance the face-to-face experience because, you think about it, here's one quick example, a mobile app. We all have mobile apps for our events. The adoption rate, it depends on the market. And, some people, and I'll be honest, sometimes I'll go to a conference and I won't even download it because you have the paper program or whatever it may be. But I'm a Gen Xer. I like paper. I'm starting to learn. I get, but I think, I was talking to a client yesterday to get some feedback on an event we did last week or 2 weeks ago. And they said, every client I talked to, great job, liked it, but it will never replace face-to-face. However, they did say one thing that was great. They had meetings with a couple of customers. We did these group meetings, and they said one of the benefits of the virtual platform was they could just go right in there. They had some questions that were unanswered, and they could go on the platform. They connected with the person, gave them the answers. Instead of having to take your business cards, go home, type your notes, and do all that, I think it's going to force people to utilize technology at live events to make events even more efficient and better than they are today in terms of networking.
Okay, great. So we do have a couple questions. We give this first one, Alicia, I'll give this one to you because it talks about sponsorships. And the question from our listener is, what is the most valuable offering a show organizer can give for a virtual sponsorship?
God, that's a loaded question.
Well, unpack it a little bit, but you don't have a lot of time.
All right, look, I think it depends on the sponsor. I really do. I think you got to have a phone call with the sponsor. You got to understand what and I've done this probably a dozen times now, what their goals are, what their objectives are. I think FaceTime, if you can get somebody on a screen, that's always good. I think intimate workshops, we're having a lot of success with roundtables. So whether it's not necessarily about the company, but it's about a topic that's relevant to what they're doing and they can hear feedback and they get to get their brand out there. I think the roundtables, if I had to answer that question, and FaceTime with potential new and prospective customers is valuable.
Great. Thank you. Bruce, I had one for you here. And this, it probably applies to both conferences and expos equally, but the question centers on cannibalization. If we end up in a hybrid environment, do you see that as the virtual piece cannibalizing attendance? And I think I take it from the listener's question, their concern is if someone has the opportunity to participate in the technical sessions remotely and has a passable expo floor experience online, is that going to hurt participation in the event overall if it's a hybrid model?
It could, but I look at it a different way. I tend to look at it, those who want to be face to face and network, and be able to have meetings with their colleagues. And that's where a lot of business is done, as well as educational or reacquainting with people in the community. Those will come. I look at it that if it's an international event and the budgets for companies are going to be reduced, at least for the foreseeable future, this enhances the opportunity for the brand of the society, the opportunity for more technical education to be out there, and that would enhance the overall program. Yes, could it hurt some? I still think the core people, let's say if you get 8,000 people, maybe 7,000 will still come, but I dare say maybe another 3,000 might attend the virtual or hybrid part for the technical, because it enhances that they, for $350 versus $1,000, they could, a boss would say, sure, you don't have to fly international, you don't have to have a hotel, you're not at the office. So that, to me, I look at it that way.
Okay. A couple more questions. I think I can lump these into one. So for the listeners who wrote these in, I'm trying to try to cover the topic here, not necessarily your specific question. And this has to do with the opportunity, I think, that virtual presents around continuing engagement between the sellers and buyers in your marketplace, as opposed to the kind of episodic face-to-face. It happens, people go home, then it happens again later, as opposed to virtual. How do you see virtual helping to improve or promote that continuing engagement? And then related to that, on the virtual side of things, if an event goes virtual, how do historically multi-day events translate into a virtual experience? So Alicia, let me just start with you. If you can give us a minute or so on that, and then I'll kick it over to Bruce.
Sure. So I've done a couple. We're in the process of this week doing a couple of virtual events. I think, look, it depends on the type of event, but this week in particular, we have one event that we've actually stretched it almost over 2 weeks. The 2 main days were today. It's a Europe event. So it started at about 6:30 this morning, Eastern time, and ended at 11:30 because we wanted to stay on European time zones. And then the week prior, we had a Young Leader Summit and a Women's Summit program that were typically part of the conference. And we pulled those out and did those 2 hours on each day. So I think shorter segments seem to work better. However, I have a hosted buyer event that's appointments. Everybody has to get at least 50 appointments, and there's no other way to split that. I have to have longer days. One thing that I have learned is the happy hours and all that other kind of stuff, don't make them more than a half hour, and try and end your days as early as you can. The reality is it's not the same. So if you can condense them into shorter periods and do something fun and make it quick.
Yep. Okay. Bruce, anything to add on that?
I think, the show, if it's a 2-day event, in some cases we're keeping them 2 days, others we're extended a day. Others, if it was a 4-day event, we made it a 5. We try to keep it in the same hours that an event would have been, no matter what, even though it's a 24-hour. But we try to do that, and and part of this that I should say, and we touched on in the as everyone in this industry is always looking at attendance numbers, registration leading up to event. We have found in all the events we've done for virtual that 80% of them come a few days before and then the days of the show, because people don't have to make the plans and the commitment to that point. So for you're running an event and you're looking at the revenue streams, that's something you're going to have to get used to it. And then the other part is unique visitors versus how many times people come back to the event on a virtual is amazing. They come back several times, more than you would expect, because they're busy at home versus when they're at face-to-face, they're committed to being there. So that is the other part that you're going to have to take into consideration too.
Okay, thanks. So we've reached our hour right on time. I take no credit for that. It was purely accidental that we stayed within our time. But I'd like to bring things to a close right now, so we can be respectful of everybody's time. Thanks to Alicia and Bruce for taking time out of their very hectic schedules to be with us today, sharing their insights and experiences on this topic. And thanks to each of our listeners too for your attention and your interest. And we hope and trust you found something useful to take away from today's discussion. If there are any questions we didn't get to, I think we got to all of them. If anything comes up later, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Our contact information is on the webinar invitation that you received. And everyone who was here today and who maybe registered but couldn't make it today will get a follow-up. Our contact information will be there as well. Again, on behalf of my wonderful panelists, clients, and friends, thank you for taking part in today's presentation from the B&L Business Media Group, and I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.